right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Serious Angler podcast powered by our friends over at X2 Power Batteries. As your host, I am Bailey Egbert, and I have another sound going on in the background here that just threw me off for a loop. But as always, I'm your host, Bailey Egbert, and joined with me is the captain, Mr. Andy Full. You ever have those things in the background? Like I have probably 30 tabs open right here, and there's like an ad that goes off, and you have no idea where the heck it's coming from. Yeah, that just happened.
Yeah,
so sorry, my MP3 folks that were like, what in the world just happened?
Yeah, that little quick audio cut. It happens to me all the time when I'm on my actual Mac computer. Like when I go into YouTube and I load it up, something will just start playing, and I'm like, oh, loud noises.
Yeah, that's the worst scramble. Too. Yeah, dude, it's like. It's like similar to like when you're jamming on the way home and you have the sound up like on your truck, and then you forget when you turn the truck off and you get back in your truck, and then you burst your eardrums as soon as you get back in your
That's me every morning, because to get home from guiding when it's like 28 degrees outside, I need the windows half down, the radio blaring just to stay awake when some of these steelhead trips I guide on are like an hour and a half, 2 hours away from my house. And then at 4:30 in the morning when I start my truck again, I'm like, oh, all my neighbors have to hate me at this point. Just have to.
It's okay. I live in an apartment still, and the people above us, this dude's got like one of those little rice burner Subarus that has like a custom
big old fart can.
Yeah, it's just loud as hell, and I don't know. It's just one of those deals where it just annoys the living crap out of me. It's more of a petty annoyance because I'll just be watching a TV show, and for the 30 seconds it's going, I'm annoyed. But again, it is what it is. But really fast. So super cool show today. We're having Mr. Fletcher Shryock on to talk about trying to fish some shallower, grassier fisheries when the temps start getting cold, that late fall, early winter, where in the South, that grass is still there. Not as much, but it's still there. And obviously it takes some strategy and some know-how to fish that stuff and find it. Because in the fall, these temps get colder. For us Northerners, we're used to going to find deeper rock, trying to figure out where, when you find them, you find all of them, that type of deal. It's not the case that way in the South, at least for a bunch of fisheries. So we're going to tap into that with Fletcher. But before we do, want to mention to you guys, we have a link down in the show notes. There is a Daiwa reel giveaway going on over at Omnia Fishing. You guys can go take advantage of it. It's free to enter. Just enter, and basically you have a chance to win some brand new Daiwa reels, which it's a no-brainer. So I highly encourage you guys to do so. And then Andy, tell the folks what's new coming up this week on Lure Lab before we get into today's episode.
So this weekend, I'm actually going to have like a 3-bait buyer's guide that I'm going to put out of 3 baits that I want to purchase over winter that I like a lot. And I think they're going to be huge players in 2023. But we have a lot of really cool shows coming down the line. It's just working on scheduling them in.
Nice.
So that'll be a fun little episode.
I'm more surprised that you limited yourself to 3.
Yeah, it was hard trying to keep it under 20 minutes.
Yeah. So that's why it's 3, because otherwise you probably went on for hours if people saw your actual shopping list of baits that you're going to be buying.
So I took 3 baits in 3 colors and talked about where and why I would use them and when.
Okay.
Yeah. So
nice.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. We'll look forward to that, guys. That's coming Saturday. If you haven't checked out the Lure Lab show that we have on the Serious Angling Network, highly encourage you to. And last note before we get Fletcher on here is I mentioned the December 30th show was going to be live for our little Christmas duo we have going on with Alex Rudd. That has now moved to the Thursday, so just one day prior, December 29th. We're going to have our, guys, we do our not so serious shows every now and then. That's going to be our New Year's / Christmas special. Already can't talk today, Andy. It's not.
Oh boy. Yeah, my voice is like shot because I went to the Bills game on Sunday.
Yeah, it sounds like you smoked 2 packs before you do this.
I feel like it too. I'm whooped. I took a nice hour and a half nap on the couch today. I had no idea if I fell asleep until my wife called and woke me up, and I was like, "What?"
Nice.
Oops. Yeah, it was good times.
Dad life. But so December 29th, that Thursday night, We'll be going live. It'll be a lot of fun. Try to get some stuff to give away before we ring in the new year. But without further ado, our guest for today, Mr. Fletcher Shryock. How's it going, Fletcher? You got us? Uh-oh. Fletcher, it's not just me, Andy, right?
Yeah, I don't know if he can hear us or not.
Fletcher, you got us over there? Uh-oh.
Yeah.
You got us now? Oh boy. All right. Well, I will improvise and I will shoot him a text because it's like going through talking to a wall. It's funny. We have not encountered this issue before.
No, you know what? I'm just gonna start doing that to you when you talk to when we're in person. Just
nobody there. Oh my gosh. We were perfect offline here before we started this show.
Yeah.
Did we got you now? Oh gosh. It's weird because we can see him perfect. Oh, he said he's got zero audio. Oh no. All right. We'll take you off the stream for now. I'll see if I can help you in the background, try to get back. But Andy, really fast for the folks, we usually do this at the end. But for folks that are looking to get into some big smallmouth in the springtime coming up for next year, where should they be looking, and what dates do you have available?
Well, I mean, you can shoot me a text or on my Instagram, you can find me, or go to my website, which is just fullfishingguide.com. Dates available. I have about 15 days available in May. A lot of them are weekdays with Memorial Day still wide open. June is probably my favorite month, and I'm down to about 10 days at the back end of it. So basically from like the 18th on is open, and then I think I have like the 2nd, 4th, and 5th open at the start of the month. So we're filling up pretty fast here in the spring. And actually, like, I'm working on it now, but I think I'm going to be at the Cincinnati and Columbus Fishing Expos in January and February with a booth with Jeff Hippert. So that's going to be fun.
Nice. Heck yeah. Well,
yeah. So
guys, look out for that.
Some more trips. So fill them up while you can before they're gone.
Yep. The link to all Andy's stuff is below. But let's try this again. I think we might have fixed it now.
Yeah.
You got us now, Fletcher?
All right, I can hear you guys.
All right, we're good.
Oh, awesome. Welcome.
I haven't heard a single word you guys said. I'm just sitting here waiting. I'm like, well, I'm guessing the audio is going to kick in when I go live. And I looked up and it says, you're in the show. And I couldn't hear a word you guys were saying. So
we've never had that happen before, but that was honestly, that was pretty funny because we entered you into the show and we're just sitting there you're just looking at us. And we're like, does he not hear? So what is going on?
As you went live, it got cut off. I'm like, well, it'll kick on whenever when you join in. But no, I had no audio. So.
Oh man, that's funny because I was telling you offline, I was like, look, when you're down here in the queue, you can still hear us, and you're probably like, damn, this guy's a liar. I can't hear crap.
I told me the opposite of what this is really supposed to be, but we're good now.
Yeah. We're just talking to a wall. It just happens.
I'm like, they evidently don't want me to hear what they're talking about, or I don't know what they're talking about right now.
Yeah, we're just sitting here talking crap about you.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's good. Well, dude, it's good to get you on here. We met actually down at Red Crest. It was good to have a couple of beers with you, and we talked about this at Red Crest, getting you on the show. So I apologize that it's now December and we're finally getting you on here. But we made it happen. It's good to get you on here. And what we do with everyone that's new to the show is tell a little bit about how you got into fishing in the first place, like bass fishing, how you got into it, that whole thing.
Yeah, so I started out, my mom was a school teacher. My dad ran a body shop, lived in a super small town. We lived in a trailer. And at the end of the drive, there was an old strip pit pond. And my dad, and mom at times would take this, just take me down there. I don't even remember catching one. I just remember always being down there, just love fishing, not even catching, and it just kind of went from there. I was obsessed with bass fishing at such a young age. And I think it was mostly because of, Jimmy Houston and Roland Martin and the Bassmasters that was on TV. I mean, we're talking 94, 5, 6. I was really young, but I was really intrigued by all of that, and would just I watched more of the stuff on TV than I even fished, at that time, because I didn't have a lot of opportunities to fish. Number one, being from Ohio, 4 or 5 months out of the year, as you guys know, you can't fish. So there was a lot of time to spend studying and, watching shows and all that stuff. So it definitely built up the excitement for the time about, around April come around, that I could finally go down to the little creek or go to a pond or whatever. We definitely, didn't have a lot of good options as far as fishing goes, for sure, growing up. But I still loved it, just the same as if I did.
Right. And you and Hunter didn't grow up like in the state that's really like plentiful in terms of bass fishing.
No, I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is we come from a place that was as least plentiful as you could completely get. And to kind of see where we ended up is kind of wild. I think it just goes to show you that if you really, really want to do something bad enough, you'll find a way to scratch, claw, to get yourself in a position. And that's, I think, what both, obviously we haven't had great careers, but definitely want to have a lot more good things happen. But it is kind of cool to see, if you want something bad enough, you can go get it. So, yeah,
honestly, I think we talked about this a little bit with your brother when he was on the show, but I think it helped you guys in terms of the smallmouth stuff, because having Erie right there, I still remember, I think it was probably 6 years ago or so when I was growing up, I was like on the beginning of my YouTube binge and watching you and Hunter go up and smash on smallmouth in Lake Erie. And that kind of really helped drive my smallmouth, like just addiction. But I feel like having that big water there, helped a little bit in terms of that. But obviously you both are very similar in terms of, at least from our eyes, like shallow water, flippers, power fishing, that sort of deal, which probably speaks Ohio.
Yeah, we just had to scrape and claw to get a bite in Ohio. So that was kind of where the flipping and pitching, because pretty much you could flip and pitch, year round and do pretty consistent. If you went outside of that too much, you're really going out on a limb if you picked up a big crankbait or something like that. So just learning basically how to finesse flip up there in Ohio was probably the one thing. If you wanted to do good, to do good in tournaments up there, that was the one thing that I felt like you had to be good at. So.
Yeah.
We were kind of forced into becoming flippers,
Right.
But no, we had Erie. Erie was 2 hours from the house, and we spent so many nights, or I spent so many nights up there sleeping in the parking lot. Go out there in the morning or whatever. Because like I said, it was about 2.5 hours to the good stuff from my house. So there was no sense in driving back and forth or whatever. I'd go up there, fish all day, sleep in the back of my truck, and then turn around and get back out there in the morning, spent a lot of time up there doing that. And, it's funny. I'd only fished tournaments for 2 years before I started fishing the Bassmaster Opens. And I'd won a Southern event, already made the Classic that year. And it was like, well, I can fish the Northern Division and possibly make the Elite Series. And I had never really fished for smallmouth on Erie until that point. So I had to learn, went wide open for 2 weeks, crash course smallmouth bass fishing on Lake Erie. We'd always go up there and largemouth fish, but never went after smallmouth. So a couple weeks prior to that open that I jumped into, that's whenever I started learning how to smallmouth fish up there. So it's kind of crazy,
okay.
Think back on how much has evolved and changed over the last 10 or 12 years. It's pretty wild. So.
Yeah, and it's crazy too to talk about. Erie, obviously, we're both from Buffalo, and if you're from Buffalo, Andy can attest. Unless you know the goods, it's really hard to get into largemouth fishing on Erie, on the Eastern Basin anyway. Whereas where you guys are at, you can launch and probably start fishing basically.
Oh, it's insane. Yeah, there's so many largemouth on the western side. It's insane for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Spoiled by that. That was the one gym that we had in Ohio. That was the only gym, because you went anywhere other than Erie and you were struggling to get a bite. Spoiled up there real fast.
For sure. So really fast, kind of hit on how you got into tournament fishing then.
So obviously, like I said, I was 8, 9, 10. I had my own fishing show when I was 10. My brother did a video on that on one of his YouTube.
I remember that.
But just watching, obviously, the Bassmasters mostly at that age. And then we started into motocross racing when I was around 11 or 12, started motocross racing and ended up racing some pro motocross, supercross stuff, AMA Nationals, AMA Supercross. And it was funny because we was at Budds Creek, Maryland. I think it was 2007. And there must have been a big tournament on the Potomac. And I looked at my mechanic that morning. There was bass boats going everywhere in the parking lot, whatever it was. And I looked at my mechanic. I'm like, dude, when I'm done racing, I'm gonna go start tournament fishing. I want to become a pro fisherman. Like, that's what I want to do. And he just looked at me like, you are an idiot. Like, what are you? And it's funny. I just ran into him like a couple weeks ago whenever I was up in Ohio. We got together for some family stuff and invited him, and we were talking about that. He's like, I just remember you looking at me just so serious that you're going to be this fisherman. He's like, Fletcher, do you realize you've got to qualify in 2 hours? Like, we've got to go racing. We can't be sitting here talking about you going bass fishing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are. So it is kind of nuts, you know. But yeah, that's so I just kind of jumped into it though. I spent about 2 years fishing local stuff, and hold on just a second, guys.
Sounds like an AC or something going nuts.
Walked in the house and like I'm in the shop right now, but I just literally turned the phone on. My heater's making some crazy noises, so I just turned it off. But yeah, I mean, so I think just, you know, watching that stuff, you know, at a young age and really, you know, piqued my interest. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time fishing local stuff. Like, I went 2 years fishing local derbies, and I was like, Bassmaster Opens. Like, why not? I think a lot of it was because I learned a lot from racing motocross those number of years. And I feel like in a lot of sports, like once you reach a certain level in one sport, like, you know what it takes to make it into the next one, you know? And I knew from racing, like, just because you were really good at racing on your local tracks didn't mean anything. Like, until you could go out there on the big tracks against the big, you know, the big dogs and do it. And the only way to learn how to do that is to do it. You can read all the books you want. You can watch all the film you want, until you're out there riding your bike on that gnarly track and you're on them big hills, up the hills, down the hills, the big whatever. Like, until you're in it and doing it, you're never going to learn. And that's how I approached my fishing. Like I said, I fished the club tournament stuff for 2 years. And it was like, hey, if you want to do this, and it wasn't like I was like, oh, I want to be a pro today. Or it wasn't like I set out to be. I see a lot of young anglers now, like, they're just dead set they want to be a pro fisherman. I wanted to compete fishing. I wanted to have fun with it. But I never really said, oh, I'm going to go. I know I'd said that to my mechanic, but I never really set out to say, like, this is what I want to do. It was more like just feeding that competitive itch that I have, you know, just like I had in racing. I wanted to be competitive. I wanted to take it as far as I could take it. Now, whether that meant I was a pro at the end of the day and making a living wasn't really necessarily a goal. But I definitely approached it the same way I felt like I needed to with racing. You just jump in. Like, you're either going to sink or you're going to swim, and the only way to really learn is to get out there and do it. So, and Hunter's approach was the same way. Hunter never really fished local events at all. Like, there's a lot of, like, you know, friends of mine that fish locally still in Ohio, and they don't even know Hunter because he fished so little. Like, I kind of gave him, you know, told him what I felt like he needed to do if he wanted to have a career in fishing. So it was literally within 6 months, I want to say, of him fishing. He was fishing the Bassmaster Open on the James River, getting stuck on sandbars because he didn't know what was going on with the tide. But you know what? He learned from all that stuff, right? So I'm not trying to tell people just to go out there and jump into a Bassmaster Open or Toyota Series, and, you know, but that's kind of what we did, and it worked out. It's not going to work out for everyone. And there's definitely a steep learning curve if you choose to go that path. So be prepared. But I do think it's the best way to learn at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it definitely takes a very specific attitude and mindset to do that, where I think you and Hunter are kind of go-getters, and like, if we don't do this, well, there isn't a plan B, so we might as well get this done, right? I mean, it kind of seems like the mantra.
Yeah, that's exactly how the racing was. And to be honest, like, after seeing what I saw in racing, like, I had some buddies that were extremely successful. Shoot, I still have some really good friends now that are at the top of the sport. I think the one thing that kind of left me bitter from that, and the biggest reason why I didn't say, oh, I want to go make a career out of this, was because with racing, like, we got to, you know, I raced against James Stewart, Ricky Carmichael, or, you know, we was on the same track at the same time, right? But I also realized how hard it was to make a living doing that, and how few of guys actually made a living. Like, there was several guys that you would have thought from the outside looking in, if you were sitting up in the stadium, you know, 70,000 people at a race, you look down at a guy and be like, oh, I bet that guy, you know, lives in a 10,000 square foot mansion on, you know, on some lake or whatever. And the fact of the matter was, the dude was struggling to pay his cell phone bill. but he's out there racing, you know. Now, there was some guys that are obviously making millions, but most of the guys were struggling, is the point that I'm trying to get at. So when I got into the fishing, I wasn't just dead set that I was going to just become this pro fisherman, because I just done that in motocross and failed, as along with so many others, obviously. And fishing's a lot like that too. There's a lot of guys that try and try and try that don't ever make it, that didn't get the right break at the right time. You know, great fishermen that could have went on to do amazing things. I guess the first one that pops into my mind is Ike and Ellie, right? He was done fishing. That was I think the Classic was his last event. I'm sure you guys know the exact story, but basically he was done fishing. He's going back to college, whatever it was. He's going to fish the Bassmaster Classic, and he was out, done. He had a bad divorce. Had Mike not won that Classic in 2003 on the Louisiana Delta, he probably wouldn't be fishing now, right? I think there's a lot of stories like that out there. Kind of back to the racing thing, and you know, whenever I wanted to fish professionally, I just knew it was going to be a slippery slope to really make it. And thankful that I did. Probably pushed it a little harder at times than what I should have as things progressed down the line, but you know, it's worked out well, but it doesn't work out that way for everybody. So, and I don't mean to sit here and be negative Nancy and tell someone don't pursue it. I'm just saying, be smart about it, know that it's not going to be easy, and just kind of telling my story about it is all. So
yeah, no, I respect the heck out of it. And especially I think there's been a few people that have been giving that raw and transparent point of view to that deal more lately. And I think that's better for the sport, because there's definitely people that come into it thinking it's all sunshine and rainbows. And they get to that level and they think, oh, I'm just going to have money, I'll be set now that I'm here, when that's not the case anymore, especially with, you know, generations changing and social media is becoming more and more of as priorities change for sponsors, like people have to be liquid with that, which is, you know, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir right now. You fully know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of you have to be more business savvy often than not in this industry now than even to be able to catch fish, which is sad in some truth, but it's unfortunate times that are changing. But to change topics, because we're here to talk fishing, because that's a rabbit hole I could go down for hours. But we'll save that for some beers.
Hours about that,
yeah. So the topic of today's show that we want to get into was, so like we mentioned earlier, Andy and I are like from the north. We live on the Great Lakes. Our late fall winter is completely different than from a Tennessee or an Alabama, like Louisiana, that type of deal. And a fishery that I think you excel well at, which is shallow water fisheries. They have grass, laydowns, a lot of shallow cover. But really kind of talking about grass as well, like when temps start getting cold and fish are getting out of that summer to fall transition, getting heavy into fall and getting later into the winter, what are some of like the first moves you're making when you notice that summer to fall transition coming to end and really starting to get in the thick of that colder temps?
Yeah, that's a load. It all depends on the fishery, right? I mean, I just moved from Guntersville up to Chattanooga, so I'm, you know, an hour and a half from Guntersville if I want to be there. But I live right on Chickamauga, which is drastically different than what Guntersville is. I just got back from Cherokee and Douglas, which is, you know, the polar opposite of it. I mean, it just depends on what lake we're talking, you know. So I guess since you wanted to talk about mats and grass fishing, I lived in Guntersville for 4 or 5 years. I spent there now. So more towards the fall and things start to cool off on Guntersville, everyone knows the mat bite, whether it be a frog or punching, has been just a huge deal. And there's so much grass, so much cover. I think Guntersville has so much what I call smoke and mirrors. There's so many different types of grass on that lake when you get into the fall, because everything is, you know, everything's to the top. If it's going to get to the top by the fall, it's to the top, right? Usually we don't have a lot of rain, so the water levels are somewhat usually down. They keep Guntersville really stable, but I would say it's typically down in the fall, and things are really matted up. And I guess the first thing that comes to mind late fall on Guntersville is I'm just trying to speak to the general person that's trying to learn how to punch. There is so much grass on Guntersville. There's so much grass, but the fish only like to use certain types in certain situations. I want to say that 90% of the grass there is not good. There's, like I said, there's so many different types, whether it be eelgrass, star grass. There's a lot of coontail, and a lot of times in places that's not good. But what's crazy about that, though, for you guys being up north, is there's certain grasses on Guntersville that they use, and they only like to prefer that grass. And most of the time, that's milfoil and that's hydrilla. But you can take some of the star grass that I've never caught a bass punching out of on Guntersville. You can take and put that stuff in New York, and I've caught sacks of bass and bunches of them on, I think you guys know Onondaga up there in New York.
Yep.
Fish that stringy grass that I cannot catch a bass out of at Guntersville or these, Nickajack's another one has a lot of grass. Cannot get a bite in it down here, but you go up north and the fish use it like it's the greatest thing ever, right? So it's so different. I guess you start talking different lakes. I'll tell you another thing on Guntersville that they don't really like to get in, that they love up north, or even different bodies of water. I can go to Florida and catch them out of it. You guys know the chopped up eelgrass you get from the boats running around when it packs up against boat docks or reeds or pads.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Fishing that type of stuff. But you go up to New York, that's all you're looking for, right? You're looking for anything they can get their head under, and you take a Guntersville or a Nickajack or certain places, and they don't even prefer that at all. They would rather be in, milfoil or hydrilla 95% of the time. If it isn't those two things, you're wasting your time mostly. So it's a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So I guess I'll just kind of bounce off of whatever you guys want to talk about. But no, when it gets towards the end of the fall, that's definitely the fight, in my opinion. Because what usually happens is when things starts cooling off, you got to realize, look at a mat as a blanket across the surface of the water. If the water, say, is 55 degrees and you get a cold front come in, or just a cold night and it's 40, 45 degrees, well, the water all around those mats, all the heat's escaping, right? But where that mat is, it's like a blanket on top. It's holding that 55 degree water, whatever that temp is. It's holding that heat in the water column. So them fish a lot of times will get up real high in the water and stay under those mats because that's what's keeping the heat in. I actually took a heat gun. This was probably in February. I took a heat gun to Lake Seminole and was just kind of curious. And I kept one on my boat for a while. But the hyacinth was actually, I believe at the time, and this was a cold day. It was probably, when I say cold, 50 degrees, cold for North Florida, right? The hyacinth was roughly 10 degrees warmer than the water temp. So if a bass is cruising around and say, 55 degree water, and here's this warm blanket that happens to be 65 because the sun's beating down on that mat, they're going to ease up under that deal because that water's a few degrees warmer up under that mat than it is outside of it. So actually taking a temp gun around was kind of crazy. And there's other times too where mats can get too hot in the summertime. And there's only certain mats that fish will use in the summer. I hate to even tell everyone this stuff, but there's certain mats, if it gets too hot, you'll notice in the middle of the day, sometimes in the morning they'll get in that type of mat, the stuff that gets really hot. But as the day, as the sun gets higher and those, certain mats get almost just too warm for them fish to be in. I've noticed that whenever I've caught fish out of the stuff, I've noticed how hot sometimes whenever the sun's beating down on something at noon, 1 o'clock in the summertime in Florida, you can feel the heat off that grass when you catch a fish out. You're like, that's probably a good reason why they're not in that stuff real good at 1 o'clock versus, they're in it good in the morning and then they get out of it as the day progresses because it heats up too much. So there's all kinds of, different directions you can go with it, but it's something that I've done a lot. So I feel like I somewhat understand it, maybe more than most. And sometimes I think that's a detriment, but that's just how I like to fish.
Got it. So I have a question. In the wintertime, when you're punching mats, do you prefer a heavy weight still to get through it, or do you try to go with like the lightest weight possible since those fish are using the top of the canopy to kind of slow it down and just to barely get it through?
I think the weight for me, no, I'm not trying to control the fall at all with the weight itself, because anytime I'm punching, I'm in direct contact. I'm always, I'm allowing that bait to fall fast or slow because I'm in control. The biggest thing that I want to do, I want a bait that can get through, or a weight that's big enough to get through the mat without disturbing it. But I want to get through every single time. I don't want to be finessing, trying to get, because sometimes a lot of times whenever you're flipping mats, if it barely goes through, and this can be with a 2-ounce weight, there's times where it just barely slips through and it slowly kind of goes through and then it eventually falls. Very rarely do I get a bite like that. Most of the time when I get my bites is when it slips through and doesn't disturb the mat. Like, so if I'm using a 2-ounce weight and it doesn't move the mat, I'm good with that. Does that make sense? I don't want it disturbing, if the fish is high in the water column under that mat, I don't want it moving the mat when it goes through. So whatever that weight is that I need to get through without disturbing the mat. But it's what I was getting at is I want that bait to fall pretty quick. I don't want to give them time to think about it or have it just kind of finesse its way down. I mean, I've got bit like that, but typically it's a pretty constant drop. And a lot of times it's a controlled drop that I can, put on. Cause like I said, I'm always keeping the line tight, that I'll ease it down how I want, or at the speed that I want. I don't think I vary that too much, whether it be summer, winter. I usually keep it at a pretty good steady clip. Now, the part that, depending on the temperature and the mood of the fish, I will, whether I yo-yo the bait or how long I hold the bait in the mat, that's more dictated on, by temps and the attitude of the fish, more so than the weight. The weight, you just have to, use a big enough weight to get it through without disturbing the mat. And then everything else after that is up to me to figure out what the fish want, if that makes sense.
I am just drooling at the nuggets that we're getting out of you right now because I have so many more questions.
I appreciate that. To me, it's like I just do it so much. I don't know what people know or don't know. So if you want to slow down, that doesn't make me an expert, right? But I've done it a lot. So there's just certain things I might try to skip past. If there's anything you want to specifically talk about, let me know. But
yeah. So I'm keeping notes in here because I have a simple brain, so I'll forget a question. So that's why if I'm looking down with the pen, that's why. So I'm not texting, I promise. But one of the things I remember, and I can't remember which event it was. I can't remember if it was an event or if it was like a Bass U video, but it was with you, and you're talking about punching in the morning, where not a lot of people attribute punching in the early hours, whereas people think about, I'll pick the stick up at 10 a.m. once the sun's up type of deal. I'm one of those people, but I watched your video, and I've since started punching in the morning, and you mentioned that about that late summer where those fish are in the mats earlier because the temps will be cooler. Is that why that went? Do you punch earlier, the later in the summer, and put those sticks away as the as the sun gets higher? Like, how does that work?
Definitely, there's times where if you get in that stuff that gets too hot, there's times you have to get out of it and go to a different type of matted cover, I guess would be the answer to that. I just feel like in the morning, a big bass is still going to seek out deep water or really thick cover. And I don't think you're going to get the numbers. I think this was on the Wired to Fish video, I believe is the one you're talking about.
Okay, Wired. That would make sense.
Yeah. You're not going to get like a bunch of bites typically in the morning, but what I have noticed is I can catch a big one or a few big ones in the morning because them fish are still relating to that heavy cover. They still want to eat. And I feel like sometimes they react better to that weight dropping through real quick in the morning because the sun's just coming up. It's still dark under that mat, but you know what it's like to us in the morning, when the sun's first coming up, it's, you can see a lot better. It's different than when the sun's going down because our eyes are adjusting from light to darkness. Well, obviously in the morning, the fish are adjusting from dark to light. So they can see better than than we think they can whenever the sun's coming up, right? But you're just taking a bass that's already aggressive, that's already, you're catching that big 5 or 6, 7 pounder in the morning when she's pretty active anyway, that's still under that mat because the temperature, she's been under that blanket all night because the temperature is consistent and you're able to get a couple quality bites. And another thing too, a lot of guys don't do it at that time of day. So like as like you had said, you never really thought about doing it that way. You can usually get a couple solid fish in before, you get into that morning lull all the time, whether it be 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30, there's always a lull in that part of the day where it's hard to get a bite. And I've really noticed that on Major League Fishing because obviously this live score tracker, but definitely first thing in the morning is a good time to get a couple quality bites.
I can already see it now. Bailey's putting the topwater rod away and he's going straight punching from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every tournament.
He'll get one bite and lose and just blame the whole day on me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to shoot you a text.
Me anyway. Well, that was good, but
Yeah, I'm gonna text you right off the bat. I'm like, well, bro, your theory didn't work.
It's not worked for me a time or two as well, but
Hey, if I'd 10 out of 10, I'd rather catch him punching than on top. It might sound crazy, but that punch bite is addicting.
I call it stuck on stupid all the time.
You call him what?
Stuck on stupid.
Stuck on
Just
stupid.
take a big weight and just go all day. Don't stop. You know, there's nothing more to it. You don't even think about picking up a topwater or a chatterbait. You know, you just stay on it. And that's where a lot of it comes from too. I think a lot of people, they don't do it enough. They don't just commit to it. And like legitimately what I said is it's funny, but it's kind of true. Like if you're going to fish that way, you're going to have to spend days with that thing in your hand on different bodies of water. Cause I can go to a place like Seminole that's different than Guntersville. Like I'm not just I can't look at a mat and just be like, oh, right there. Like there's times that I can. Obviously we all know points, ditches, all that stuff, right? But like, man, a lot of it just comes down to you just got to put your head down and go. Like there's no easy answer to it, you know, like you're going to have to stay stuck on stupid and just go until you figure out what they want to do. And it doesn't always make perfect sense. You know, to me at times, like you just don't know why there's a school of them down this crappy looking stretch of whatever, but there'll be a group of bass somewhere that they're just there, you know, but you're not going to find them unless you fish for them. And that's the one thing that I do like about it.
I love that saying of stuck on stupid. So you were talking earlier though, like how there's like this random stuff on Guntersville that never works down there, but works all the time up north. And that's what we call our fish. They're stupid. So you can attribute our northern fish. They're just dumb. So they're like, oh, green grass. We'll go sit in it. It doesn't matter what type it is. It seems like they're always there. Especially those Onondaga fish, man. They're like radioactive. They got something wrong with their brain.
They've only got 6 months to eat. They're just going to eat whatever. Now, I don't want to say that northern bass are stupid or easy, but I'm just saying like there's just certain things at certain bodies of water like that work really well, and you take it to another place 100 miles away and they want nothing to do with that. It's the most bizarre thing, but just something I've witnessed. So it's really hard to sit here and tell you, you know, do it like this and do it like that because it's different all the time. So
right. So what you were talking with about certain windows later in the year or summer when it comes to punching, how does that relate, or how does that compare to this time of year with that remaining grass, say on a Guntersville, or just kind of like a grass prominent fishery? I'm sure. I mean, we talked about grass fishing a bunch on the show in terms of like trying to find obviously that remaining healthier grass, but in terms of cadence and windows, how does that relate this time of year when the temps are much colder?
Well, there's one thing I do want to touch on that I started into a little bit, and that was back to the whole MLF score tracker thing. We're able to kind of see what everyone's catching or not catching. I've always felt this way about grass fishing, and especially fishing in Florida. Obviously, is always pretty much in grass. But there's always a bite window in the morning. Every MLF event we fish, from the cups all the way through the BPT, there's always a bite window in the morning, you know, call it sunrise to 9, 10, whatever. Then it shuts off. And then it resumes usually around, it's usually about an hour and a half to 2 hour delay. Like nothing is going on, or it's very minimal. Well, you take grass fishing, I feel like when they stop biting and when you hit that lull in the grass, you catch nothing. Like, say if I'm catching them cranking, square billing, whatever, at, Chickamauga right now, and I hit that lull, I'll still catch a few bass through that lull, call it 10:30, 11 o'clock. And then around noon or 1, I'll hit some stretches where they go to biting again. I feel like in the grass, when they're biting, they are really biting at times if you're around them. But when it goes dead, forget about it. And it's even worse in Florida. I've seen a couple events we've had down there. I remember I'm trying to go back to 2019 because we're going back to Toho here soon. But I was watching some of that the other day, and they were like, no one's catching anything. Like, it was a great first period, whatever the window. When it shut down, they were done. Like, you ain't going to get a bite. You can throw on a school of them. You can drop a big weight on a school of them. They're not going to bite. But then there'll be that certain window when it picks back up again. You better be on the stuff because they're going to all go back to biting at once. And that's more so in grass than anything. When they're not biting, they're not. But when they are, you better be, get on it. So
that goes back to your stance on like sticking to it, right? Sticking with it throughout the dead periods.
Yeah, because you never know when that window is going to open up. Like, you just don't know. And sometimes it don't open, but most of the time, if you just stay stuck on it, you're going to figure out a way by the end of the day to make it, it's going to happen.
This is probably the part of fishing that I hate the absolute most, because I'm the most impatient person possible. Like, more than like seeing them and they won't eat, the fact of like when you have those dead windows where they might be there and they're not eating, that eats me up more. Like, I can at least, like, if I know they're there, that's one thing. Oh, dude, that drives me nuts. Like, when people talk about windows and they rely on it, that's like my biggest weakness from a mental standpoint, is just trusting that that window is going to come.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's experiencing that though, and having it happen again and again and again and again makes you realize it. I mentioned Seminole. I went and fished the Toyota Series there a couple years ago, and I was catching them punch. I think they won the tournament on a jerk bait, which was interesting. But I went through that morning, and I think I had 1 or 2 fish, and I had a co-angler that day, and I think he had 1. Okay. I kept rolling down this one stretch, and I think it was probably the 4th time my co-angler was like, dude, how many times are we going to hit this? And he obviously knew who I was, and he was super cool, but you could tell he was kind of getting annoyed. Like, we went down this stretch 4 times. I haven't caught one. I said, dude, and it was about, I want to say 45 minutes to go, 30 minutes to go. I was still sitting on 1 fish. I told him, I was like, nah, I'm going to pull up on one of these stretches and it's going to go down. Like, just be ready. And it literally, like, within 45 minutes to go, you could tell he's rolled his eyes. The day's over. Forget about it. We went down that stretch, I'm pretty sure, for the 5th time, and it was mayhem. It was crack, crack, crack. I'm in the live well. He's never punched before. He's back there reeling him in. And I'm like, pop, 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 pop. There was the one, I actually pulled it out of the mat or did something. It comes out of the mat and lands by the boat. So it lands on the grass edge, but not in the mat. And my big weight just falls basically in open water. And I go to reel up. My line's just going sideways. 3-pounder. So we hurried up. Like, fish were flying and we just ran back to weigh in. I don't know. It was a decent day. But like, I looked him in his eyes like an hour to go when we both got 2 fish for the both of us. I'm like, dude, it's going to happen. And he's just like, this dude's crazy. So, yeah, you got to have that, you've had to experience that somewhere along the way in order to stick it out, because anyone in their right mind would have left and did something else. I'm glad I didn't. And I still, there was some doubt at that point. I'm not going to lie. There was some doubt at that point that I was coming in with 1 bass. Like, there was. But I also knew how fast it could happen. And I was still leaning on the chances of that being better than not. So, and it did. So it's just kind of, when that stuff happens to you, I guess the point of that whole story is when that happens to you a couple of times, you start to understand it, and you've only got to catch 5 instead of trying to catch 25 in our old MLF format. When you only got to catch 5, you can do stuff like that. So,
right. So I think, like, one of the big takeaways for people that are watching this now or later or are listening to this episode is this time of year, finding the right grass. Cause I feel like finding the right grass is a little bit easier this time of year because there's less of it, obviously, with the falling temps. But I think patience is more of a virtue this time of year than anything in terms of windows, that if you can find that stuff, they're going to be in it. It's just a matter of sticking it out until they click. Is that correct?
yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest thing you start getting into this time of year, I think the later in the day is going to be your best. There's always a bite in the morning. I feel like whenever it's cold, for whatever reason, I don't care if it's 18 degrees. I'm sure you guys can agree. First thing in the morning, we'll keep trying to call. But
Popular man.
no, not at all. Just happy right now when I'm talking to you guys. That's all.
Hey, get off that crappy show.
There's always that window first thing in the morning. But then I feel like for the most part, the later in the day, pretty well, no matter what bite you're searching, whether it's flipping or punching or whatever, I feel like the later in the day, the better. So
that makes sense. We have a couple questions coming in through here, and guys, feel free to keep, letting these questions fly. We'll throw them Fletcher's way. We have. I'm actually kind of curious about this one because I'm majority of everybody I know, and this seems kind of like a very simple question about flipping with braid or fluorocarbon. But I'm going to twist his question a little bit. Is there any time that you flip around this grass that we're kind of talking about with fluorocarbon instead?
So the only time I'll use a fluorocarbon leader is if I'm flipping like submerged grass. And that's something that I do like to do a lot. But anytime that I'm like punching through any sort of a mat, I don't like it. And I've heard people say, especially at Gunnersville, once again, I just like using that as a reference because it's
right.
That if you flip fluorocarbon, you're going to get way more bites. But dude, that fluorocarbon is loud. Like braid makes noise, and there's a lot of different braids out there, and I could go into so many different things right now. But to stay on the topic, the fluorocarbon, I've been told, gets you more bites in the mats on heavily pressured mat fish. But from my experience, that when you know more than drop it in the mat and you got to pick up on it, you know the sound that it makes. It's like like it's louder than the braid. It vibrates and is louder than the braid, in my opinion. And then obviously you don't have straight braid, so it's really hard to get the fish out. I've played with it a fair amount, and in my opinion, it's a no-go for me. But I also have heard people say that it's been the deal for them. So it's something that I've experienced. So one thing I will say that I do is I like to use a really smooth braid. I use the Vicious no fade braid anytime I'm punching. I try to stay away from, this is no rip on Power Pro. Vicious has a braid that's basically the same exact thing. It's their standard braid. It's a 4-carrier braid, I believe. It's a lot rougher, and you can hear it. You can hear that line going through the guides when a guy's using that 4-carrier braid. It's a great braid, but whenever you're flipping mats with that braid, it's extremely loud. Like you can just hear the zzz, zzz, zzz. And I don't know if it's so much the sound as it is the vibration to those fish. I want to smooth. I don't when I go to yo-yo that bait in the mat, I want something that's smooth. And like I said, even with the fluorocarbon like still catches and makes a vibration and a noise that I feel like spooks them more than anything. It's not. I don't think it's a visibility thing with the line. I think it is, an added sound or vibration with that line going through the mat, because I don't think they can see that well under there. There's no way they can distinguish braid from fluorocarbon. I think it's something to do with the sound and vibration that it makes above them on whether they're going to bite or not. So,
yeah, I mean, when you actually look under those mats and all the crazy grass going each and every way, it's like there's no way they see that braid and they're like, "Yep, that's line. Like, I'm not going to eat that." Yeah.
No, but I think they hear it though. Like,
right? Yeah, and I believe that.
That that 4-carrier braid, whichever brand. I just use that as an example. And Power Pro, I'm not trying to promote Power Pro. I'm just saying they make different ones. And the Vicious that I use, the no fade Vicious braid, is hands down the best punching line that I've used. I've been very impressed with that stuff. It's really quiet. It handles very well on the reel. And another thing that I like to do with my line that a lot of guys, well, most would disagree with me. If I know that it's going to be windy at all or whatever the case, I'll go down to 40-pound test braid. I'll go to 40-pound Vicious no fade. If I feel like I want to be a little bit more aggressive and maybe I'm not going to retie as much, I'll go to 50. But I don't ever go above 50. I never go to 65 because you don't get through the mats as easy. And the bigger the diameter of the line, the more vibration and sound you're going to get. And the same as remember I was talking earlier about the bait falling through the mat. I want that fall rate consistent because I'm in control of the fall rate, right? Like I don't want my weight to be in control, but if I've got heavier line, oftentimes the line will catch and it doesn't get that drop that I'm looking for. The only difference between fishing 50-pound and 65 for the people that go out there and break fish off, don't get mad at me. You just can't be lazy. Like when I'm fishing especially if I fish 40, if I know it's going to blow a lot that day or whatever the case, I can get through mats a lot easier with 40. And I feel like 40 gives me that perfect fall rate, but you have to retie. Like if you don't retie with 40-pound, honestly, every 20 to 30 minutes, with 50-pound, you're retie once an hour. I feel like with 65, like you can go several hours without retying and you're fine, but you're losing so much along the way as far as presentation and being efficient. hey, I'll sit down and retie every 25 minutes if I'm being efficient every time I make a drop, versus having this big old heavy line that's making vibrations and it's not going through the mat clean and the wind's grabbing it because it's this big around because I'm using 80-pound braid or whatever. There's no reason to use that stuff unless you're being lazy, in my opinion. There's not a bass big enough to straight pull break 40 or 50-pound braid if you've tied your knots correctly and you have, retied every so often. So I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but that's just something that I know has been a big benefit to me to go into those lighter braids. Now, I would not go to 30. 30 is a bad deal, but 40 and 50 is really where it's at. And I know everyone's right, agree, but I'm just giving you my insight. So
no, it actually makes a lot of sense to me, because when we're talking about like vibration and line and fluorocarbon, right? Like to punch a mat with fluorocarbon, at minimum, you should be using 20. That's a thick line in fluorocarbon still, and you're running a 40 or 50-pound braid. It's the diameter of 12 and 14-pound test. So when you go to that realm of it, you are going to get less vibration from it because it is so much thinner than that 80, 65-pound braid or 20-pound fluoro. So when you're in that dense jungle, I mean, 12-pound test braid is basically invisible as it is. It's like, it's so thin, they'll eat it out in open water.
Yeah, I agree.
Honestly. So yeah.
It's
awesome.
And for people that may not understand, because I think a lot of people, when they look at braid, they're like, I can throw this in the nastiest stuff, never retie ever again. Like, we're good to go, let it rip. Like, explain to them why you'd be retying every 20, 30 minutes, even with 40-pound, which to a lot of people seems super thick. I mean, for us, like, it's sometimes people, when you mentioned, people that might disagree with you, that look at 40 as there's definitely flippers that look at 40 and they're like, yeah, that's too light. But for some people, they're like, holy crap, that's heavy. Like, why would you be retying that often?
Well, the biggest thing that happens when you're punching is the weight. The weight's going to ding the line up. I always like to have inserts in my weights. I have not found too many weights that didn't have inserts that didn't cut my line really quick. So that's another thing to really pay attention to. But yeah, your weight's going to cut your line. Just the weight bouncing around, whether you have an insert or not, is going to cut into that line. And 40 is just on that tipping point. It just cuts through a little bit quicker than a 50 or obviously a 65. 65 can take some abuse. 80 you can go all day with 80. But, like I said, the benefits, if I've got to retie every 30 minutes, give me the lighter stuff that I can be more efficient with. So, like I said, a lot of it just comes down to the sound and disturbing the mass and everything else. And I'll tell you another one too. Even throwing a frog. Some guys like 80-pound braid on my frog all day. Well, I can't cast 80-pound braid. So we'll just say 65. I can't cast 65 near as far as I can throw 40. Now, 40 is still getting sketchy, but if I'm fresh line, everything's right, whatever the case, I feel better with that. And another thing, I can make a frog walk a lot more finesse. Now, you're not always trying to do this though either, but if I'm really trying to like skip up under bushes or willows or whatever, I can walk a frog a lot easier on 40 than I can 65 because there's not as much drag in the water. You're going to have to retie. You're going to have to keep fresh, more fresh line. Once again, it's becoming more of a maintenance issue than anything, but you're also going to get performance benefits out of it that you're not going to get out of 65 or 80. You're not going to outcast a man with 65 if he's throwing 30 or 40. He just got to make sure he doesn't break it. That's obviously the trade-off. So,
right.
If I'm like bombing, some of them mats, you guys know what it's like whenever the milfoil comes up and the frog bite gets good. The longer cast is the deal a lot of times, right? We've that over and over again. Well, if I want to make a long cast with the least amount of effort, I'm not throwing 65, right?
Right. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. For
I
sure.
don't want to knock. It's just stuff that I've learned that helps me. And dude, like honestly, I break fish off from time to time. I'm a lot better now than what I was in the past, but I will break some off that had I had 65, I wouldn't have broke. But for the most part, I think nowadays I've just got so used to just in a routine of, retying. So
yeah, no, it's really technical. And I really like that because there's a lot of flippers that are like slap on the heaviest stuff I can find, and they're not very technical beyond their pitching. But I like that technicality of this style of flipping, power fishing, in terms of being strategic with it, which I really like. one of the questions I wanted to ask, actually really fast, we have a question here from Tom Mix asking if you ever punch with a Tokyo rig.
I have a little bit. It kind of goes back to that deal that I was saying earlier, just about being efficient. I was not as efficient with the Tokyo rig that I was with a standard punch rig.
Gotcha.
Now, I talked to some guys that really felt like it was the deal. They felt like they got more bites with it at times. I think the biggest benefit that I see with the Tokyo rig is your hookup is going to be better. So if you're in a situation, look, catching bass punching is not easy some days. Like there's sometimes I swear they have little hands and they can grab your bait without getting the hook and somehow take your bait 5 out of 5 times. Like there's some days where that it gets a little tricky, and a lot of it comes down to that big tungsten weight being ahead of the hook, being ahead of the bait, and blowing their mouth open. Or it's really creating, it's hard to hook a fish. The bigger the weight you go, like I mentioned 2 ounce earlier, I hardly ever use a 2 ounce. Reason being that the weight just gets to that point when it's too big and you're blowing their mouth open. So with the Tokyo rig, the weight obviously isn't in the way, so you're going to be able to hook up with more fish. The problem with the way that I see it, back to being stuck on stupid and just being repetitive and being, efficient, I can't be as efficient with the Tokyo rig. But maybe that's something too. Like I'm constantly evolving. Maybe it's one of those deals where I do have a Tokyo rig rigged up whenever I do find a group of fish, whenever they do start biting funny, that I, employ that deal then. That's just something I just thought of off the top of my head even, but I just don't feel like I can be as efficient with it overall is the reason why I haven't got as far into it. So
yeah, it makes sense. I haven't really gotten behind the whole Tokyo rig train just yet. Tried it a little bit for like spawning fish where you can have like the 2 weights that clack and keep the bait in place type of deal. But beyond that, like I have them. I just don't really throw them. Like it's so hard for me to pick that up, like flipping grass and stuff over a jig or a Texas rig. But I think it's like one of those things you got to just force it, experiment, and like try to do something new. But I can definitely see. I'm pretty sure Wired to Fish too has a video that like literally just came out about punching with a Tokyo rig too. So interesting timing on that.
Because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, maybe that's something I should employ, like start messing with a little bit more. Obviously not to cover water with, like that's right. Out to cover water, but maybe like in it once you really find a group of them, because there's times where they bite funny. Like it's not easy to get them hooked sometimes. I don't know why. And then usually it's whenever 1 or 2 of them go to biting funny and you can't hook them, the whole dang lake's that way for a period. It may be just for a period of time, whether it be an hour or 2 hours, a front comes through, they'll start biting funny. And maybe that's something that I start using the Tokyo rig, in those situations and trying it anyway. So,
yeah. So we're going to wrap up here in a second. I have a couple more questions, and then we're going to end this thing with a fun question for you. But my question is, so with BPT going now to 5-fish format, which actually I'm really curious with the midst of the score tracker and the 5-fish now, how that's going to shake things up. I'm really, really interested to see that. How is your style? Because being a power fisherman, obviously, in talking to you here, you love to flip, and this kind of might put some tide towards you in terms of format. So how are you going to adjust going back to 5-fish?
Well, so what's crazy is around the start of the BPT, like I just kind of got to a point, call it my career, whatever you want to say, where I was just done making things more complicated. I think the start of the BPT where I was finally like, okay, I'm just going to fish the way I want to fish, and it is what it is. I just took on that attitude, and like, I wish I'd have done that for years, at Bass even. There was so many times where I just would look back at tournaments where I was like, what were you thinking? If you just picked up a jig and went down the bank, like that's a top 10 or a top 20. But no, you're out there throwing a Demiki rig over 80 feet of water because someone told you to do that at the boat ramp 31 days ago, right? Over on some, I would just do stupid stuff. So to answer your question, like I started out BPT, like, fishing, I guess, my style. And looking back on it now, like it worked. I made a lot of cuts with the BPT with the all you can catch format, but I'm really now looking forward to going back to 5 and slowing the game down a little bit. I'm really looking forward to it. And honestly, if I was to talk about the formats just real quick, I don't think there is a perfect format, because there's times Where the BPT format, the catch all you can catch, was badass. Like if we had, and when I say that, I mean like a guy maybe catch 8 or 9, not catch 49. I don't like those events, and I think that's what a lot of guys wanted to get away from. But there was certain events at the beginning of the year. You take like a Lake Fork, you know, I don't know, Jacob Wheeler catches 10 bass for 65 pounds. Like that's freaking cool. Like you don't see that. It's not that you're never going to see that in a 5 fish because he threw 5 of them back, but he had 10 that weighed. I'm just using this for an example, right? There is definitely a time and place for that format where I think you lose it with the 5 fish. But at the end of the day, I feel like our little fishing, I call it little, but you know what I mean, our fishing community, that's just how we've always kept score. What's your best 5? What'd they weigh? So I think that's the biggest reason why guys are going back. And as far as it pertains to me, I think it'll help some for me because whenever you're a shallow water guy, I mean, I've caught them off the bank quite a bit too, but overall, I want to have obviously a limit, and I also want to have my weight carry on each day. Because the deal with zeroing the weights for the knockout round and turn around and zeroing the weights out for the championship round, dude, it's day 6. Like and if you've beat up shallow fish for 6 days and you have any left to make a surge and try to beat Jacob Wheeler on the 6th day on shallow fish, you have found the mother lode. I think we're obviously the 5 fish deal, and at least now we've got 2 elimination days. They zero the weights. Then from there, it's knockout round and championship round as a cumulative weight. So if I catch drop 5 big ones in the knockout round, I can squeak through, with a decent bag in the championship round and possibly win the event. Whereas before, every time they zeroed them weights for a shallow water guy, you're just running out of fish. The entire week, everything just keeps going downhill. So the 5 fish thing, I think will help some for me possibly at times, but I think carrying the weight is obviously a big deal too. Because those fish aren't there on day 6 like they were on day 1. So
right. Yeah, I think that definitely is gonna. It's gonna be really interesting to see if we're gonna see different names at the top or different names that were at the top. Do you think the leaderboards are gonna shake up at all in terms of who's up there?
Man, I don't see it changing a whole lot. I think the guys that are catching them, and the guys that aren't catching them aren't. There's several times where I would hear guys say like, "Oh, I'm not. I'd rather. I can only fish for 5. I can't do this format." Well, in 2 days, they might have weighed 4 fish. Like, dude, just go catch 5. You know what I mean? Like, do the same thing you would do in the other format here. And, it was amazing in a lot of our events. It really wasn't a numbers game. If you go back and start looking at them, like when I really started going back and trying to think, there was not a lot of high number, especially since obviously we went to the 2-pound minimum. It would take an average of what, 6? No. Yeah, probably 7 scoreable fish a day to make the cut. I think that's cool. What I kind of got tired of, and I know a lot of guys got tired of, is the events where it just got to be a runaway and you've got to catch 23 bass that weigh an average of 3 pounds just to stay in the cut. Like, that's the part for me, we kind of lost the fans, I think, and it wasn't as fun either, personally. So I'm excited to see it go back. Honestly, if we had it, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of guys that feel the same way. A lot of guys want to see like a 10 fish limit. Like a 1 pound minimum, but 10 fish limit, obviously catch, weigh, release. You got to catch 10, but once you get to 10, then you have to adjust. I personally think that would showcase the guy that can go from catching the numbers to catching the big ones. I think that would be really cool. I think you can get lucky and catch 5 good ones. I don't think you can get lucky and catch 10 decent ones. Right.
Right.
On that. Do you like the 10 or 8, 10, 12 limit? Do you guys like that or no?
I think it's really unique. Like, I agree that would showcase more than the guy that I think there's some big bags that are caught in the 5 fish that like you're talking about, like with your co-angler in the last 30 minutes and you make hay. So that would certainly on days like that, where it's like that kind of grinder, would make that 10 fish super interesting. I mean, at this rate, so I'm biased in the sense that I just love watching live fishing because I like to watch guys way better than me, like yourself, go to work. And as a fan, I'm bad about the conversations about these because I'm so biased. I love like bad events like that are hard for you guys because I learn more about how you adjust. So I'm like a bad reference for questions like this because I like to see it suck, which sucks for you guys. But
Same, honestly. I'd much rather watch the grinders where you're struggling to get 5 bites. But I think a 10 fish format would be neat. And the fact, like, if you go to a place like Fork, right, you might get like an 80-pound 10 fish bag. And then, but if you have 7 fish, you could not be out of it because you could have 7 6-pounders and be just slightly behind.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
no,
I think
I
10
like
fish
that.
would be cool.
It would showcase like those special days when guys are like up at, say, I don't know, Lake St. Clair, and a dude's throwing back
Yeah.
4-pounders to get a 4.5 or a 5. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
count dudes other fours, because that's like a phenomenal day that doesn't happen all the time. And I think with the 5 fish, which is what we've all done for many years, you kind of lose those exceptional days. But overall, obviously, if we had to pick, I think the 5 fish is better than the all you can catch point. So
Yeah.
I do like the idea of finding a middle ground though, like appeasing the beyond a 5 fish, but also keeping that concept. And I'm still a personal fan of the fact that all the fish are going back to. I know people love bringing fish to the stage, and like from the bass side, I love events like they do on Fork where they bring in 1 or 2 big ones to show the folks. And the rest are still in the lake. Like from a conservation standpoint, I'm all for trying to do what's best for the future, but I
I'm
think
all about putting them in my live well, but it's just not. If I love it and I miss that, but at the end of the day, like what you just said, it's not good for the conservation of the sport. So
oh yeah, I'll agree. Like there's nothing cooler than going back to the live well, opening up, and you're like, damn, we sacked them up, boys. And
yeah,
like that's awesome.
kind of
But like,
for a minute and shut the lid. Yes, yeah,
yeah,
From a
but
conservation standpoint, I love the BPT format, especially for smallmouth fisheries in the summertime, right? Like, as somebody who's a full-time smallmouth guide, it kills me when tournaments weigh in 100 smallmouth and probably 85 of them are going to die from barrow trauma because 90% don't know how to fizz them properly. And two, I mean, they just die because you're pulling them out of 40 foot of water regardless. Like those are the tournaments. I almost don't even fish smallmouth tournaments anymore in this summer because of that fact. It's a big resource for me, and I hate seeing fish die. So, like, I'm a huge proponent on catchway release tournaments for smallmouth fisheries, any fishery in the South in the harder summer. It just you got to protect them.
yeah, I didn't want to mention that, but yeah, I mean, if we're being honest, there's a lot of. I think even the largemouth, obviously not springtime when the water's cold, but I think a lot of fish don't make it in largemouth in the summertime. The hotter months, they just don't make it. And I think we're going to see the way technology is going. I think we're going to get to a point. I know everyone likes the stage and holding up 5 fish or whatever number, whatever that is. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to get to a point where everyone's catch, weigh, and release. I would say within 5 years, personally. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think that if you look at the way that technology's trended in the last 5 or 10 years, and they're going to have something where fish are weighed in the boat and released. And for the conservation aspect of it, I think that's the best thing for the sport. I think fishing has gotten so big in the last, especially since COVID, it's gotten crazy. They've gotten dang hard to catch. They're super educated. And then you take that and you throw in some lakes, 3-4 tournaments a week that go on. Like you're killing fish, you're educating fish. Like I think the day is coming sooner than later where we're going to see catch, weigh, release. Maybe not every, Tuesday night, or Wednesday night dogfight tournament we have down here, whatever. They're going to do catch, weigh, release. But for the most part, I think it's going to start trending that way more so than not. So,
yeah, it's gonna be super interesting to see because I mean, there's obviously a lot of fisheries being affected, and like every niche in not even just fishing, but in general, the people at the top, whether it's sports and you're talking professional leagues or you guys in terms of BPT and bass, in terms of fishing, like the people at the top are the ones that have to set the example and kind of lead by that. So if someone's like, if there's no voice at the top that's leading the direction of conservation, which I think there's a lot of companies that are positioning to do that. A lot of brands being that I went to the ASA summit this past fall. A lot of big brands are there like AFCO and such. There's a lot of big plans in place. And I think the leagues that really get behind that, which the MLF has done with this catchway release, it's definitely a strong proponent But I also understand the flip side of people like to see fish being weighed in, which I've always like said multiple times on this show to Andy is like, that's why I liked, if you wanted to bring fish back, to set a slot limit like you guys do, like a 2-pound limit for events, set a slot limit for each tournament that's customized for that lake. Bring in 1 or 2 big ones, because even when you bring in 5, you're not showing 5. You're showing 1 or 2. You don't need to bring all the fish back. So I feel like that Texas Fest style that what you see on like Lake Fork is a way to get best of both worlds, at least for the intermediate, of like appeasing those people that come to weigh-ins, but also being conservative in terms of the fish. But yeah, I mean, I think this one is, for at least for Andy and I, it's just 2 guys that watch fishing with our opinions, whereas like you're on the front lines of this.
No, I like it's one thing being in it all the time, but yeah, I think you just said something that I think that is the perfect happy medium. But I don't know, because I do know at Lake Fork when Bass did that deal. Of course, I watch everything, but like I think their Bass track was accurate, very similar to what Score Tracker was for us. Am I right?
Yes.
So everyone knew before they even went up on the stage with 1 8-pounder or whatever. Everyone kind of knew the results. So I don't know if MLF was to do that. Do you cut the score track? There's so many different ways. I know everyone's thought of every way, but yeah, to your point though, you get the best of both worlds doing that. But how intriguing is a weigh-in if you already know the results?
Right. I would. So here's an aspect where I think the kayak side could help influence, and stick with me here, okay? I think that could influence where in kayak tournaments they shut off their standings with a couple hours to go in a tournament, especially on say a final day, where it could be super interesting. I think this would be a great media play, especially from a fan standpoint, where say you're watching, you know who's leading after a couple hours in the morning, say on a final day, 9, 10 a.m., say 11 noon rolls around, you shut them off completely. No one can see them. And you watch people catch and upgrade throughout those last couple hours. And now you have people bantering online of like, nah, man, his fish is bigger than his. I think he's got it. But you don't know until they come to the stage and it's like revealed. I feel like that can add suspense, add some banter.
Watching the fish, you're saying you're still watching the fishing.
Yes.
But there's no weights.
You don't know who has what at that point.
I like that a lot. I never thought, because I guess the question that I had, not to get off track to what you just said, 'cause that's a very, very good point. But like, what would the fans rather see? Obviously, everyone likes seeing the fish on the stage. They want that moment. But I think it's pretty dang, and this isn't trying to, I think it's cool to actually watch it go down to the end too. You don't have that moment on a stage. You have that moment, but you're watching it go down like a football game or a baseball game, live to the last cast. And see Bobby Lane reeling a 2-pound, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, cool too. I like what you just said is like a happy medium middle ground. I'm sure that that's been thought of, but I like that a lot because it adds suspense. Still watching it all.
It adds a new drama standpoint.
Yeah, it does. I like that. I'm sure it's been thought of, but I'm going to keep that one. I might have to mention that one. I'm sure it's been talked about, but that's pretty good, dude. I like that.
If not, I think someone listening to this probably already has taken it and ran. We're all screwed.
It was there. Hey, whatever. I mean, as long hopefully this whatever works out for everyone in the end is all all that matters. But no, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to go about it. Either way, like I love tournament fishing. I just hope that whatever we're doing is for the preservation of just fishing in general, but just hope that like the sport keeps remaining on. But yeah, I mean, this topic is something super exciting for me just in terms of talking about it. Like, this is another thing that we could go on for hours. And we'll have to have we'll have to get you on again to talk about some of these nitty gritty topics that we brought up tonight. I got them back on here.
Let me know.
But dude, heck yeah. It's been a lot of fun tonight. And I want to bring up one nugget again because I'm not letting this slide because I was super curious about it. But is that like a thing that people are keeping hidden about this heat gun with grass when the temps are cold? You brought that up earlier.
No, dude, I do a lot of weird stuff. I've got micrometers all over the place, and I do a lot of weird things. And the heat gun was, it started out my water temp gauge was messed up, so I started using the heat gun, and then I started finding all these goofy ways to check temps and do weird stuff. But definitely, can learn a little bit about Mat fish. You can understand mat fishing a little bit better if you go around with a heat gun and kind of, well, which obviously once I've spelled it out, you don't have to, but it just helped make sense of things for me a little bit. So, and actually seeing, hey, this is actually, even though it's freaking freezing cold outside, but the sun's out, it is actually 10 degrees warmer. This actual mat is 10 degrees warmer than what the water is. So
I like that.
It's
got my wheels turning.
What's that?
It's got my wheels turning now. Like
you're gonna see Bailey posted up on the kayak, and someone's gonna be taking a picture of him shooting stuff with a heat gun.
He's shooting fish to see if the fish has come up out of deep water, there's all kinds. You think about it,
dude. I mean, stuff like that. Like that's something I thought about too. Where it's like, for me, I'm an offshore guy. Like I love whether it's largemouth, smallmouth. I love to be off the bank. It's just, I don't know. But one of the things I was thinking about as of late was, what the surface temperatures are, and especially like early spring or late fall, if you get like one of those super cold mornings and really hot evenings, the surface temperatures can really fluctuate, or especially if you're fishing 20, 30 feet, where I've thought about taking like paracord to a thermometer and a weight and dropping it down and letting it drift with me to get like a reading on what it is on the bottom. Yeah. Like my mind's just going to go, it's going in all different directions.
Oh, it's a whole quarter down there.
Yeah. But that's like one thing I'm like, am I going to get in trouble if I do something like that? Is there any rules against it? If I'm is that considered like, I don't know. I've just been going all over the place with that, but
that makes sense. I mean, it would be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's gotta be something. I mean, I know like Andy, you've said that there's like a certain, what is it called for Erie or the Great Lakes?
Oh, so there's a water plant outside of Buffalo that takes water temp 35 foot down, but there's actually a unit that salmon trollers use. I believe it's called a fish hawk, and they put that on their trolling boats that's attached to a downrigger ball. Depending on how deep it is, it'll tell you the water temp, like 80, 100, 150 foot down on the downrigger ball. And it's a unit that you can install on your boat that will give you the water temp down, but it has to be attached to something, I believe.
Well, so I don't know if Fletcher would ever fish water that would get colder because it's deep enough. But like, I mean, you're gonna see like Jacob Wheeler now with a damn downrigger on his boat just to get water temperature difference.
Yeah. We're out chasing temps now.
That's right. Yeah.
Whatever helps, right? Whatever helps.
Yeah, dude, I mean, the rate that technology's going, I mean, you're just going to be able to just like pan your forward facing and you're going to like click at a certain depth out in front of you. And it's going to be like, this is what the water temp is down here. Like, it's going to tell you something wild.
Feet down, 15 feet down. Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I try to fish to where if I can't, I always joke around and say I can't swim, so I can't fish in any water deeper than what I can touch.
I love that.
It doesn't always work like that. Like, obviously, I had a couple tournaments this year where I caught them deeper, but if I could have my preference, it'd be obviously a lot shallower. So,
right. Well, Andy, do you have anything left for Fletcher before we hit him with the last couple fun questions?
No, I look forward to future episodes because I feel like there's a lot of stuff to be uncovered here. So I just want to say thank you for coming on. It's good meeting you.
Guys, this is cool. Had a good time.
Heck yeah, dude. We're definitely making a second appearance here. We're going to have to reschedule right after tonight because I feel like there's a lot of untapped banter that we haven't got into yet that we need to finish. But okay, so I have two fun questions for you to wrap it up and we'll let you go. Someone had put a question about a cage match between you and Hunter and who would win, but I'm changing that up, and we're going to throw it back to the motocross days. Who would win in a race if you and Hunter 1v1?
Right now?
Back in the day, like you're both your prime.
Well, it varied. So obviously I was a little bit older. I'm 3 years older than Hunter. So for the most part, most of the years I was faster than him. Like, quite a bit. And then there was a point where he got a little bit ahead of me. And then I had to get that back because he was always fighting injuries, and like one of us would get hurt and would be out for 2 or 3 months, and then one of us would be riding the whole time. Then one of us would try to come back, and next thing you know, Hunter's passing me, and oh hell no, we can't have that. You know what I mean? So then get back up to good. Then I get hurt. This was a constant deal. But at the end of the day, he ended up going. I would say at the peak of it all, he ended up going faster than me for a year or so. So. Now, if we was to race right now, I'm good for one, but all I've got for fitness.
Oh, I love that. That's one thing that's kind of cool too. Like I want to be careful with this because we'll go down another rabbit hole and there'll be another hour. But like how like a sport like motocross, people don't realize how heavy fitness is like involved in something like that, where they think, oh, like you get on a bike and you ride and that's all it is. It's not that.
Dude, it's bad. Like I would rather do cardio, crazy cardio, other than ride a dirt bike. Like my heart rate will go insane high within a minute. Like if you're going hard and trying to do everything right, like it's intense.
Dang, that's awesome.
Like basically, max. I would redline my heart rate racing. I had a trainer. This has been forever ago now, but I had a trainer. Obviously, that I'd run my pulse. You know what I mean? And
right.
if I was running, I could run for like 2 minutes straight as fast as I could, and I could not get my heart rate as high than I could on my dirt bike. So,
dang,
it's just pure adrenaline.
Pace for obviously a long period of time. Now I don't have that in me, dude. I'm good for like a lap and a half, and I can go longer, but I start to get tired and I start messing up. You know what I mean? And I don't breathe well because you got to get into a rhythm of breathing with what you're doing too. You know, and there's times if I just jump on a bike, like I don't breathe for a minute straight. Because you're so focused on doing everything right and not wrecking, you literally can forget to breathe if you're going hard. You know what I mean? So,
dang, that's wild. That is nuts. We have our
incredible athletes. Like they've done a lot of studies on it, and it's one of the roughest sports out there, period. I think they had it at number one for a while, like ESPN or someone did a lot of research and got down into the nitty gritty with it. Yeah, the fitness side of a motocross athletes pretty dang crazy. Most of it's obviously aerobic, like you're not lifting heavy weights. You know what I mean? It's just more endurance stuff, but it's pretty gnarly. So
yeah, I mean we'll put like wrestling's another one. Like Andy, like wrestling. I think the hardest part of wrestling is the damn like having to like cut weight and not eat food and crap like that. I couldn't do that because I'm fat. But like
it wasn't that bad. I honestly think like the endurance part of wrestling was the hardest part because like you're talking about working out and sprinting for 2 minutes. Literally, when I wrestled back in high school, I would probably run 6 to 10 miles a day, go to the weight room and lift, and then wrestle for 2.5 hours after school. And like I'd run a 5K in the morning, lift when I got to school, go to school all day, sleep all day at school, wrestle, then go home and run another 5K at night after I would eat like a turkey sandwich and some potatoes. Like we're talking like maybe 4 ounces of each.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's
just
pretty
to
hard.
keep weight maintained. Yeah. It was wild.
Well, dude, if getting on the sports stuff.
Life anymore.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
I like to walk, participate, you know?
Right. Yeah. I feel like you hit that point in your life where it's just like, yeah, I'll let them do it now. Like I'm content in my level.
Exactly. Yep. I'll just stand here. Exactly.
Right.
Show up at the track, do a couple laps, be like, I'm old, I'm tired. That's it. The end.
Let's go fishing.
Got it.
Yeah. Well, dude, last question for you for the night, and we'll let you go. We've gotten you for about an hour and a half, and seriously appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun. And that is, if you could sit down, have a steak and a beer with 3 different individuals, they don't have to be fishing industry. They could be alive 1,000 years ago. Like it doesn't matter. You can bring any 3 people, have a steak, have a beer. Who are you going to choose?
Dude, you asked me a hard question there.
It's loaded.
It's
loaded.
That's not something because if I start picking names, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, that's the fun part about this question is we never tell anybody about it. And the amount of messages we get afterwards of like, oh man, I should have said so-and-so. Like it gets people thinking. I think that's the coolest part about it, especially with no warning.
I guess it depends on how deep you want to go too. Like, I don't know.
Just start firing them. The names that come to mind.
I think Kevin Hart would be a good one.
Yes.
Just so I could laugh. I don't know where that one came from. There's one.
Dude, he's literally shooting from the hip right now. I love it. This is good.
Kevin Hart, and then shoot, man. Hey, like him or hate him, I'd like to just be around Donald Trump for like 5 minutes just to see the type. I mean, like away from camera, lights, all that stuff.
Right.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, like, are you like this all the time, or is this only when camera's around?
What do you like when the camera's not on? Like, what? I'm just,
Yeah.
The third one, dude. That's hard to say. I don't know. I've been fortunate to meet a lot of people that I've really looked up to over the years, more so recently. But I don't know. I can't come up with a third one.
Okay. We can roll with that. What about, how about this? I actually threw this on one of our recent guests, and I'm using this as a plan B, or if like, because there's a lot of people that can't come up with three. It's like Andy said, it's a loaded question, especially spur of the moment.
Yeah.
But if you were to go like team tournament fishing, someone from BPT, who would be your first pick for if it was a team tournament?
Oh, Jacob Wheeler. I'll just sit down. That's simple.
Oh, that's funny.
I'll just sit down. I'll make sure I have plenty to eat and drink. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it was your brother that said that, and he posted a picture with Jacob. They just won some tournament, and he's like, had a great day culling fish and working the net or something like that.
I don't even think he had a chance to fish, but I think he just briefly spoke something about it to me on the phone. I don't even think he had a chance to fish. It was just kind of like, here, get this one. Do the call. Here you go. Let's just... and then it's over.
Big ol' yikes.
You're like a
fun
caddy.
day. Yeah, good job, bud.
Yeah, I wish I could say more right now, but yeah, you'll see. It's just, yeah, it's stupid. I don't get it. But
That's awesome. I mean, you're like a fishing caddy at that point. It's really what it is.
much.
Which rod would you like me to tie a bait on for you, sir?
What's that?
So, which rod do you want me to tie your bait on for you?
Probably can't even do that right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, dude, again, seriously, thank you a ton for coming on. I wanted to say congratulations on the Munchkin. That's awesome adding to the family. And congratulations. Good to see that it's doing well. And I mean, is it a son, daughter? I can't remember.
Daughter, yeah, she's still in the NICU. We're hoping to have Christmas, but we'll see. So she's really good though.
Hope that happens, man.
She was 2.5 or 2.4 when she was born. She's 7 pounds today. So she's getting up
there.
Getting there fast. Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
They can do.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. And I hope you guys can bring her home for the holidays. That'd be awesome. And dude, we'll be talking to you, but really want to get you back on for another show.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here for it. So I appreciate you guys. Good
awesome,
chat.
Dude. We'll talk to you.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
See you, Fletcher.
Have a good night.
Dude, I feel like if we kept talking about the sports side that we were gonna go for like hours.
Yeah, there's a lot of sports side to fishing in general that a lot of people don't realize, especially in competitive bass fishing. Like when he's talking about riding a dirt bike around the track, I'm thinking of like that 30-mile run in the morning through 2-foot waves doing 50 miles an hour at a bass boat. Like that's just stuff that gets your heart rate going through the roof. It's a lot of fun.
I mean, talking about that, like from a boat standpoint, that's just like the ability to take a beating. I think that's really what that is.
Yeah, that is also a great point. But that, like the flip side is standing on the front deck all day in those waves on top of it. Like I come home all the time. I'm like, Amanda, I burned 2,700 calories today fishing on Lake Erie. And she's like, what? Like, yeah, like I climbed 72 flights of stairs. There was 4-footers. She's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, like good shoes and stuff is like a real thing, especially when you're like going balls out, like a full-time pro angler like Fletcher is, or you as a guide where you're out the whole time. I mean, like it's not a joke. Like that's why I'm surprised more guys don't have like a shoe sponsored for that exact reason. I know there's like flip-flop stuff like Olukai and stuff like that. I probably pronounced that name wrong, but I mean, like I know Sims has a couple things, but like from a shoe standpoint though, like there's a lot of guys that like I don't know why I notice these small things, but there's guys that have expensive freaking shoes that you have no idea what the brand names are. They're like $300 shoes because of like soles for standing on a boat for that long. Like guys don't go, they think about that stuff. And that's one thing I'm just curious about. God, no one's done that from a sponsor standpoint, but
thank gosh for padded front decks. Like going from my Triton into my new Camus, the padded front deck is a lifesaver on my heels, my legs, my back. Like it's so much more comfortable, especially with a good pair of shoes.
Yeah.
They have good arch support and heel support.
For sure. That was a lot of fun. There's a lot of nuggets in that one, dude. From
too many.
The heat gun to like the punching cadence to what grass is good and not. Like, and he talked about like, yeah, there's a bunch of like eelgrass that's matted up like on Gunnersville. Like I would be the guy to fish that. Like when you see that up north, he made a great point. Like you see it up north, like you're gonna catch a fish out of it. Like
yeah, it doesn't matter what grass you flip. Usually, like you'll catch a fish in it. They don't care.
I mean, like there's definitely more fish in like a milfoil, but like if there's anything matted that's like attached to either submerged grass or on the bank, you're going to catch a fish on it. Especially if there's more than 6 inches, there's a fish under it typically in the north, for sure.
100%.
But really quick reminder for folks, the Omnia Fishing Daiwa Reels giveaway is still going on for the I think it's the rest of the month. So until the new year. That link is down below. You guys can go check that out. Enter a giveaway to win some free Daiwa reels, which why wouldn't you? No brainer. Check out the new Lure Lab episode coming up. And Andy, looking the rest of this week, we have Keith Tuma joining us for Friday's episode. He is back. The host is back. And then a week from today, we're going to have Spencer Shuffield on for Tuesday Night Live for next week.
Awesome.
So, and again, reminder that the Thursday, the 29th, is going to be our live for the New Year / Christmas with Rudd, the dual live stream. So, guys, come to that one. That one's going to be kind of our not so serious episode. Get some friends on, have some beers, celebrate 2022, and ring in the new year. Hope to have you all guys all there. Please, if you're listening on MP3, leave us a rating and review if you have not already. Helps us out big time. Andy, anything else that I am missing for the folks?
Off the top of my head, I think you do a valiant job at covering everything.
If you could see my notebook over here, it's notes everywhere.
Because you're the man.
Good grief. No, don't ever say that again.
The man.
Well, folks, appreciate you all, and we'll see you guys on Friday.